Day 989 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 705,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,580 in the past day, with Russia really trying hard to reach 750,000 or even 800,000 by Christmas time. Then as for hardware losses, 9 tanks, 49 APVs, 32 artillery, and, though we can't see it on the board yet, 1 helicopter. As Russian military aviation sources have just confirmed the loss of another Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopter. The full circumstances of the incident remains unclear, but reports indeed suggest a troubling trend of non-combat losses among Russian aerial vehicles, indicative of issues like spare part shortages and reduced training. Of course, it was just yesterday where we saw about another Russian aircraft, a downed Su-25 jet, and really putting a show of its lack of maintenance on display with its insufficient tire tread. And it all reminds me of the RAND report from about this time last year that said that due to Russia's lack of upkeep or general maintenance of their military aircraft, they should expect to see 60 to 70 military aircraft per annum lost not as a result of combat engagements, but instead from overuse and under-maintained, a figure that amounts to a plane loss once every 6 days. So the RAND report has become an analytical and statistical projection that seems to be reaching its full realization as the war continues. Now, I would normally say that this latest incident of the Ka-52 loss is, for instance, $16 million down the drain, but really it's much worse than that. It's a priceless artifact at this stage, where Russia cannot sufficiently repair these choppers, let alone reproduce them from scratch in any meaningful numbers at all. It cannot be stressed enough how serious these types of aviation losses are for Russia. Then taking a quick look at the territory of control stats, as in total, Russia temporarily occupies 18.36% of Ukrainian land, which includes Crimea and the Donbass. At the height of the invasion, Russia controlled 25.42% of Ukrainian land, so over a quarter of all Ukrainian territory, but ultimately, where they stand now, 7 full percentage points lower. As Russia continues to appear to demilitarize themselves, it's difficult to describe it any other way than that with what we see daily. Then moving along, but on the topic of stats, so Russian Major General Pavel Klemenko, a high-ranking officer and commander of the 5th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, was reported to be eliminated in a Ukrainian drone strike while riding a motorcycle with his subordinates. The attack occurred last night, targeting his staff vehicle as it moved behind the front lines. And so on this topic of stats, because earlier this week the Russian military staggeringly reached its 5,000th Russian officer elimination in Ukraine. This infographic categorizes the losses by rank, from high-ranking generals all the way down to junior officers, indicating that all levels have been affected. Further to that end, each count seen here is corroborated by Russian sources like obituaries, memorials, and news reports. It's quite the open source list. Of note, the list includes a 2-star Lieutenant General, Oleg Tsokov, which you may or may not vaguely remember that event in Zaporizhia's town of Berdyansk from July last year. So, in a later video, I'll delve into some of these figures to add a lot more additional context as well. Then we'll head to the map with a bit of a change of pace for Friday, a few little bits of tidbits here and there. With starting out in Kursk, as Russian forces are intensifying some of their offensives in certain areas of the region, targeting Progrepi, Zeleny, and Sudzha. But with these main assaults being repelled or halted, as current, with seeing the traditional use of tactics of the Russian forces involving infantry waves and BMP infantry fighting vehicles being used. And as for the North Koreans, you ask? Well, some of this is now said to be done in coordination with some North Korean elements, but we await further footage and confirmations to see exactly the extent of North Korean soldiers' integration into the Russian army, which is pretty much the footage we're seeing at the moment, teaching them the Russian language, setting up their defense positions, and so on. There has been a number of reports, though, concerning North Koreans engaging in battle with Ukrainians, with so far the news on that front shows somewhat lackluster results from the 5'3" North Korean army. But then further zooming into this region, a Hydra drone from the Ukrainian state border guards struck a Russian vehicle near to Novovenovka, as Ukrainian forces were actively disrupting Russian logistics in the region. And just to clarify here, this Novovenovka is indeed west of Rilsk, and not to be confused with the Novovenovka that's actually at the front lines of the Kursk incursion, where we also see it when we zoom in right there. As you can tell, I spend a lot of time geolocating correctly. Then headed into the Donbass, so Ukraine's 4th Guards Battalion engaged with Russian infantry in Toretsk, targeting positions at these coordinates. So I'll pop those ones in, and there it is, zoom right in there. As the AFU continues the dismantling of, or disruption of, Russian movements behind the front lines. And something which is really turning into Russia's Achilles heel for this sector. Then headed down the map and back to Pokrovsk, where Ukrainian special forces actively targeted Russian logistics and infantry. The Peaky Blinders unit, as they're known, hits enemy forces attempting to transport ammunition through various transport means, from buhunkers to trucks. So this increased systematic targeting capability of the AFU is striking at Russian logistics without a reprieve, and is really something else. Now, Russian soldiers themselves increasingly complain about these very types of examples in just the last 3 months or so. Previous to that, it was the Russian frontliners that were always complaining about Ukrainian FPVs buzzing in the air, not giving them a chance to move. But now, the heightened concern comes from the back end of Russian logistics more and more. And take a look at this still image. 3 guesses as to what this truck was carrying. Then headed down the map to the Kharkova direction, as Russian positions were shelled on the front lines of the village of Alinka, or more specifically in this case, shelled, then tanked. Then on the map, another air defense system, a Russian Strela 10 air defense system, was destroyed by Ukrainian FPV, although on this occasion it was a cross-border location into Russia, and possibly before today, when the event occurred, where the Russian system was initially operating in the open fields not far from the border with Ukraine. But once spotted, it was too late, even when it attempted to scurry off into the tree line. And so quite problematically, we find here for Russia is the open field position in nature of their air defenses, and so close to the Ukrainian border, it's just impossible that they won't be located and identified, then targeted. It really comes down to a lack of training amongst Russian personnel. Then looking around in the east, another 5-minute long clip of Fury Road, where this Russian footage displays the main supply route of their forces, where there's simply destruction everywhere. In fact, some of it was fresh, still actively being destroyed, and probably no more than a few minutes to an hour old, as a result of AFU targeting. Gee. The Russians here referred to it as, quote, a road of death in the Donetsk region, with particular emphasis on the first word there, where they say a road of death, because there's just too many of them now to accurately pinpoint which one this was, if I was to try to do so in a timely manner. Then also in the east, Ukrainians of the Achilles unit of the 92nd Brigade, the Separate Assault Brigade, reports the destruction of a Russian TOS-1A self-propelled multiple rocket launcher system, also known as a thermobaric flamethrower, where this one met its demise in the Kharkiv region. As soon as Russia pulls up these 6,000-meter ranged platforms, which is certainly not much in this drone warfare day and age, makes their days numbered, or hours numbered, probably tops 24 hours before they're targeted and destroyed as well. Then also in the east, another day, another tank shed destroyed by drone, this time from the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade. They also took out a BMP infantry fighting vehicle as well, both abandoned already, with the infantry fighting vehicle abandoned right at the point where it was carrying logs for trench building. Then to take a look at some Russian map related news. Because take this example, residents of Narimanov of the Astrakhan region urgently seek water from the river as the town faces a complete lack of water, electricity and heating. Meanwhile, they organise to collect signatures for an appeal to Putin, who remains preoccupied with his military campaign in Ukraine. But really, it's just another unread email from Putin. At some point, Russian citizens across the country, especially in the west of the country, will reach a tipping point, realizing that Putin isn't coming to their aid. Instead, he's likely to do the exact opposite, as he would impose a media blackout on these issues, or worse, allow limited coverage only to claim the problems are resolved, which is an occasionally seen repeating pattern in the Russian media. In reality, the issues rarely see real resolution, except for the occasional case that takes about 6 months to address. Then headed to Novorossiysk, so just at the edge of the Black Sea, as Russia's current and unofficial HQ of the Black Sea Fleet, where we see a great deal of radar-based satellite imagery that reveals increased Russian radar activity in the area. A location where Ukraine continues to target warships in and around this strategic port. Essentially, Russia appears to be boosting radar activity to disrupt incoming Russian weapons, including missiles and drones, aiming to jam Ukrainian guidance systems to counter the precision Ukrainian threat. So it's really part and parcel of what Russia does these days, especially given their much more defensive stance in the Black Sea, especially since they unexpectedly lost their flagship of the Black Sea, the Moskva, many moons ago. Then headed across to some news for today. So at the annual Russian Valdai conference, Putin stated that while Russia is open to peace talks, he said he was not accepting of Kyiv's demands, which of course is to maintain their sovereignty. So at this conference, Putin seemed to point at the potential for Ukraine to keep some of their land, not including what's already under Russian occupation, provided Ukraine takes a neutral stance, brings its armed forces down to 80,000 personnel, and doesn't pursue NATO membership. So effectively, Putin is looking to create the conditions in which Ukraine gives up land, reduces its army size, and constitutionally locks itself out of its own sovereign right to enter into defense pacts with other nations or NATO. So, excuse the laughter, but those are some ripe conditions for the Kremlin to perform an SMO 2.0. And I can't help but laugh because it wouldn't be the first peace agreement or treaty or memorandum or accord that Russia has signed on the matter. There is at least 6 other failed agreements of peace between the two countries, where Ukraine entered into them thinking that it would avoid Russian aggression. So it's really a case of fool me once, shame on you, or fool me 6 times, shame on me. Which is exactly the point where you can no longer trust the other party. Also, within the conference, Putin thought it wise to share that the Russian Federation has never used force first. I mean, really? Give me something better to work with here, Putin. These much smaller countries surrounding you, be it Ukraine, Georgia, or anywhere else, is a case that's not based in reality to say that these smaller countries perform forceful aggression on towards the larger country of Russia. It just doesn't make sense. Then in some more news as it relates to the winter a bit, so Kyiv introduces its first mini CHP, a combined heat and power unit, at a key enterprise, marking a significant step in local energy production. Throughout the year, the company plans to install 15 more units, boosting the city's capacity by an additional 170 megawatts. This initiative enhances Kyiv's wartime resilience by decentralizing power generation, providing reliable heat and electricity, even if central infrastructure is compromised, by maintaining critical services for civilians and essential operations despite disruption from attacks on the main grid. Then in some more news, the Pentagon confirms that Ukraine is set to receive $6 billion in military aid from the US before President-elect Trump takes office on January 20. Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh assures that Washington is confident in its ability to deliver the aid, which includes $4 billion from the Presidential Drawdown Authority and $2 billion from the Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative. Now, in terms of the general distribution for this figure, simply put, essentially $4 billion is available to supply arms directly from US military stockpiles, which will later be replenished anyway, while an additional $2 billion is set aside for purchasing arms through contracts with American defense companies. Then to some more news, and not a lot of information on this one, just photos, but fresh official pictures of the Australian SEP V3 were just released. So the SEP V3, the System Enhanced Package version 3, is the latest and most advanced version of the M1 Abrams main battle tanks that include enhanced armor, upgraded electronics, improved power systems, and better ammunition handling. So it appears that the 49 plus change in spare parts of the M1 Abrams that are getting sent from Australia to Ukraine are going through that remediation period spoken about, all in the name of getting them ready to send to Ukraine. Then to round off the video with something a little bit different today, something I don't do enough of. It's a bit corny, but here we go. So, Ukrainian servicemen honor a brave feline with a combat service certificate for its 3 months of service on the front lines. This furry little hero captures hearts with its courageous spirit, bringing joy and companionship to the troops, particularly those found on the front lines. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!